I want to thank all the members for your very insightful contributions, comments. I want to commend Mr. Loh Tia Kiang, Sylvia Lim, Mr. Pritam Singh for your also very constructive comments. And in fact, I listened to you very carefully and I couldn't find anything to disagree with you. And I'm sure our foreign partners will notice that there is bipartisan support for our approach to foreign policy. And indeed, as a small, open state, we need a bipartisan support. So I'm grateful for your constructive contributions and for the bipartisan support that we enjoy. Now, there are at least 3 key political issues, if I could summarize. First, how do we manage our relations with the major powers, given the rapidly evolving geopolitical balance of power? The second set of issues is, as ASEAN chairman, how do we strengthen ASEAN's unity, centrality, and value proposition? And value proposition not just for outsiders, but including our own people. The third political issue is that Singapore is an open, multiracial, multi-religious city-state, a sovereign country in the heart of Southeast Asia. And how do we protect our unique identity, our domestic unity, and our sovereignty from the inevitable foreign influence? And especially, and I speak very frankly now, and especially from the primordial pools of ancestry, race, language, and religion. And yet, as Mr. Loh mentioned yesterday, this cultural arbitrage is also Singapore's competitive advantage. So we need to be aware of both the opportunities as well as the challenges that confront us because of our unique position. In his budget statement, the Minister for Finance identified 3 major transformations. You've all heard about it. The shift in the global center of gravity towards Asia, and that basically, as Mr. Loh says, means China, India, and ASEAN itself. Second, the emergence of new technologies, the impact that will have on jobs, the economy, and indeed attitudes to free trade. And third, an aging population. The aging population, especially an issue that confronts Singapore, confronts China, and the fact that in contrast, ASEAN as a whole, 60% of ASEAN is below the age of 35. Now, these 3 trends present us with both opportunities and threats. And what we are actually trying to do is that as Asia grows, make use of our unique identity, our unique position, and even our unique cultural arbitrage in order to ride on our region's growth and dynamism. But even as we do this, we must also be mindful that there are multiple transboundary pitfalls. For instance, protectionist nationalism is on the rise, terrorism is a clear and present threat, and in the midst of the digital revolution, cybersecurity breaches, fake news, have eroded trust in institutions and divided societies. In fact, sometimes it has even become a tool of foreign policy. Now, Singapore's foreign policy, given our unique position, has always been guided by 5 key principles. First, Singapore has to be successful, it has to be vibrant. If we are not successful, we are not relevant. And as Minister Mentor Lee said a long time ago, the world will not miss us if we disappear as a small state. There is no irreplaceable function that a small state provides the rest of the world. Second, we must preserve our ability to make independent sovereign decisions based on our own national interests, and we must not become a vassal state. we're not for sale, and we're not going to be easily intimidated. Third, Singapore aims to be a friend to all. What this means is we do not wish to be forced to choose sides, nor to be caught in proxy battles. Fourth, we promote and we believe in a global rules-based order with international law and international norms. And if you think about it, this is essential precisely because we are a small state. And fifth, we must be a reliable, credible, and consistent partner. For us, we don't have the luxury of changing, flip-flopping, changing our views quickly over time, or saying a different thing to different partners. We need to be reliable, credible, and consistent. I will start by addressing our relationships with the major powers. Mr. Amrin Amin asked about relationship with China. Many of you have also asked about US-China relations and the dynamics and how that affects us. I think Ms. Jessica Tan asked that point. With China, our relations, our track record of cooperation are deep, long-standing, and substantive. Last September, Prime Minister Lee visited Beijing at China's invitation. The timing was significant. It was just a couple of weeks before China's 19th National Congress of the Communist Party of China. We didn't expect that they would have bandwidth. Nevertheless, they invited our Prime Minister. When Prime Minister met President Xi emphasized that Singapore and China have no fundamental disagreements, no conflicting interests, and no differences on basic principles. I'm quoting him. We will publish the exact words in Chinese to the media later on. In fact, this is our own long-standing belief. We have always believed that a successful China, a stable China, is good for our region. In fact, the rise of China and the elevation of hundreds of millions of people from abject poverty to a middle class is the biggest story of our lifetime. And as Mr. Loh said yesterday, I think as people with Chinese ancestry, at a cultural level, at an emotional level, we must take pride and joy in that achievement. But we are also aware that we are not Chinese citizens, and Singapore is the only political entity, the only state in the world where Chinese are a majority, but we are not under the Communist Party of China. Now, we have always consistently supported China's strategic economic development, and this is clearly evident from our unique government-to-government projects, Suzhou, Tianjin Eco-City, and more recently, the Chongqing Demonstration Initiative. In fact, surprisingly, Singapore has been the largest foreign investor in China since 2013. But of course, our role will have to evolve because unlike the past 2.5 decades, where we were investing and we were moving concepts and ideas into China, today China has become a net exporter of capital and technology. So our role inevitably must evolve to keep up with the times. The other point is that we must anticipate, we must expect that from time to time, there will be issues of difference between China and Singapore. After all, we are two sovereign states with very different national circumstances. So we must expect differences in perspective, and we must not get flustered even when pressured. This is to be expected. This is almost par for the course in international relations, because you cannot expect two countries' interests to be completely identical. In fact, it's no secret, we've had some bumps along the way, but I would say that these episodes over the last 2.5 years have helped both sides to understand each other's position better. I think it has made for a more mature relationship. Currently, we are negotiating an upgrade to the China-Singapore Free Trade Agreement. This will further enhance market access for our companies, create more jobs for Singaporeans. Of course, we also want to see more Chinese companies accessing opportunities in Southeast Asia through Singapore. Our multifaceted cooperation is constantly evolving. Both sides have identified new areas for cooperation. We have the JCBC, co-led by DPM Teo. We've now identified finance, legal, and judicial sectors. One example was the inaugural Singapore-China Legal and Judicial Roundtable held last year. And these initiatives will complement the existing high-level fora on economic cooperation, social governance, and leadership, all again incidentally chaired by DPM Teo. These extensive and high-level engagements between China and Singapore epitomize that long track record that builds trust and confidence. The Belt and Road is another major opportunity for cooperation. When I visited China in June last year, Foreign Minister Wang Yi and I agreed to establish 3 platforms to deepen Belt and Road cooperation. First, on infrastructural connectivity. Second, on financial connectivity and support. And third, to look for opportunities for third-party collaboration, including joint training for officials from other Belt and Road countries to work and to exploit opportunities that the Belt and Road Initiative provides. The potential is huge. Singapore accounted for 85% of total inbound investments to China from Belt and Road countries, 85%. And nearly 1/3 of China's outbound investments to Belt and Road countries actually flowed through Singapore. I didn't quite believe these figures. Double-checked with my staff. They said, yes, these figures are from China themselves. We are working together to connect the Overland Silk Road economic belt with the Maritime Silk Road through a new southern transport corridor which links Chongqing in western China to the Beipu Gulf in Guangxi. Our businesses can expand into western China through Chongqing, just as Chinese companies can use Singapore as a gateway into Southeast Asia. And this creates a mutual hub effect. It benefits businesses, it benefits people, and as I said, by interconnecting the Overland Silk Route with the Maritime Silk Route, it still maintains Singapore as a hub. Let me turn to the US. The US is a long-standing, close strategic partner, and we've had mutually beneficial relations over the last 52 years. Our defense ties form the backbone of the bilateral relationship. And let me give you a recent example. When Hurricane Harvey struck Houston last year, we quickly deployed 4 RSAF CH-47 Chinook helicopters and 34 of our own servicemen from a training detachment in Grand Prairie, Texas, to help with the relief efforts. The RSAF was able to work seamlessly with their American counterparts because of the regular training between both sides. In fact, we have 1,000 SAF servicemen training in various detachments in Arizona, Idaho, and Texas on the F-15s, F-16s, the Chinooks, and the Apaches. No other foreign state has more troops on US soil. Our strong trade, investment, and business ties with the US are underpinned by the 2004 US-Singapore FTA. In 2016, the US was the top foreign direct investor in Singapore, with investment stock worth Singapore $281 billion. The US is Singapore's largest trading partner in services and the 3rd largest trading partner in goods. Our total trade with the US stood at almost 140 billion Singapore dollars. There are over 4,200 US companies here, which help create good jobs for Singaporeans. And US exports to Singapore and Singapore investments in the US support over 250,000 American jobs. This is a statistic we share with President Trump to make the point that he has real skin in the game in Southeast Asia and especially in Singapore. Singapore is the second largest Asian investor in the US, second after Japan, and Asia's #1 buyer of US commercial property. I think these are investments. Last month's Singapore Air Show showcased our strong defense and economic cooperation. The US fielded the largest foreign delegation. They had 170 exhibitors. The US aerospace exports to Singapore total almost $5 billion in 2016. These deep economic linkages have given Singapore access to US markets and US technology and allowed Singaporeans to learn with and from the best in the US, including the academic and research institutes. PM's visit to Washington last October reinforced these fundamentals. President Trump described Singapore as one of the US closest strategic partners in Asia. President Trump has accepted Prime Minister Lee's invitation to visit Singapore later this year. We look forward to receiving him. There have been questions about the US commitment to the liberal world order and free trade as we know it. One statistic which I think members of the House should be aware of is that in 1960, the US GDP was 40% of global GDP. In 2017, although the US GDP has grown, as a proportion, it has shrunk to 25% of the global GDP. Now, the reason for giving you these statistics is to make you all appreciate that it is a completely legitimate political exercise within the domestic US politics to ask why they should unilaterally underwrite the global world order as we have known it for the past 70 years when their share is shrinking. I say this because you need to look for deeper trends beyond the headlines and the personalities. But the point we make is that the US has had a head start here. The US has enormous investments in Southeast Asia. The US has significant reservoirs of goodwill. It is for theirs to lose, even as they sort out the domestic political questions. Now, for us, because of our close relationship with both the US and China, clearly we hope that there will be a stable US-China relationship. Because if they maintain the peace, there will be peace, stability, and prosperity in the Asia-Pacific. We enjoy good relations with both. We want, and in fact are well-suited to be part of what President Xi has referred to, a common circle of friends. Remember my earlier point about not being forced to choose sides. So we must anticipate that there will be an element of competition between the US and China. But the difference, the big difference from, say, the Cold War, is that the US and China are highly interdependent in a way which was never present in the relationship between the Soviet Union and the US. So we hope that both sides will see that there's too much to lose by confrontation and by conflict. We, of course, view a trade war with great concern. We've seen some early salvos. For instance, the tariffs that the US is imposing on solar panels, even refrigerators. The target was China and Korea. But because Singapore also makes solar panels, we also become collateral damage. This illustrates the danger of a full-blown trade war. Let me turn to ASEAN. It has always been a cornerstone for peace and prosperity in our region. ASEAN unity enlarges our strategic and economic space, amplifies our voices on the international stage. It promotes an open and rules-based, inclusive regional architecture. The alternative, if we did not have ASEAN, is to become a bunch of vassal states operating on the principle of might is right and being an arena for proxy wars. I think Mr. Loh also mentioned that yesterday. Therefore, ASEAN is a cornerstone of our foreign policy, and we will work to strengthen ASEAN-led regional architecture by working with our ASEAN member states and our dialogue partners. Now, our dialogue partners have proposed various regional initiatives. So, for instance, I mentioned the Belt and Road Initiative just now. More recently, you may have heard the US, Japan, India talking about a free and open Indo-Pacific. Now, without getting to the details, I would just like to share with you how I view all these proposals. I basically ask three questions. First question, whatever the proposal is, whatever the label is, what does your proposal mean for ASEAN centrality and unity? In other words, will these initiatives keep ASEAN at the core of the regional architecture of Southeast Asia, or will they, wittingly or unwittingly, pull ASEAN apart and force us to choose sides? That's my first question. Second question, whatever the plan or initiative is, does it facilitate trade, investment, infrastructure, and connectivity? Clearly an economic agenda, because ASEAN has got such growth potential in the next 2 to 3 decades. Trade, investment, infrastructure, and connectivity is strategy. Third question, whatever the initiative, does it support a world order based on international law? And for us in particular, because we are a port, an island, a city-state, 1982 UNCLOS is sacrosanct. Our chairmanship of ASEAN is an important opportunity for us, in our own small way, to make a positive contribution to a substantive and forward-looking agenda. Ms. Sylvia Lim mentioned her concern that, according to a survey, only 13% of Singaporeans express interest in ASEAN. I share your concern. But my own take is that I think we take it for granted. After 50 years, we have taken it for granted that there's no war in Southeast Asia, that we transact with each other, mutual interdependence, investments, trade, that when we have disputes, we go to the international courts and we resolve disputes according to international laws. That's at the political level. Actually, if you look at the people level and you ask yourself, tourism numbers, Singaporeans are great travelers, and ASEAN is our immediate neighborhood, and huge numbers of Singaporeans travel to ASEAN. You look at schools and you ask the schools about school trips, lots of trips. Service learning, then SIF, the Singapore International Foundation, and volunteers. And even if you look at both formal and informal volunteer groups and what our students and young people do in the more rural areas, even in Indochina. And then if you ask our businesses what their investments are across in Malaysia, Indonesia, actually if you do a proper catalog, I think we are fully invested in ASEAN. It's just that I think we take it for granted. But I take your point. We need to raise the flag of ASEAN more. I'm always intrigued that if you go to any ASEAN embassy, ASEAN member state embassy, you will see us fly 2 flags, our own national flag and our ASEAN flag. But you don't often see the ASEAN flag in Singapore. So I take your point that we do need to fly the flag more and to make our people appreciate how important ASEAN is to us. Our chairmanships for themes for this year are resilience and innovation. It expresses our hopes for ASEAN to meet future challenges, particularly to deal with emerging issues like digital disruption. After all, this is what we are also doing at a local level. How do we deal with the digital revolution? And in fact, this is an opportunity for us to do more with our fellow ASEAN members. One key initiative is the ASEAN Smart Cities Network. We envisage this as a platform sharing best practices, solutions, urban solutions, new technologies. But I think the most important thing is we are looking for interoperability. Whether you're talking about e-payment systems, ASEAN single trade windows, facilitation of travel, facilitation of even the ASEAN self-certification regime, in order to make it easier to export goods and services. We want to do all this because, in fact, there's tremendous growth potential for intra-ASEAN trade. Someone asked about the Model ASEAN Extradition Treaty. In fact, coincidentally, I think today we completed our third round of the negotiations. Not over yet, making good progress. As ASEAN chair, we will have to work hard to maximize our common ground, and we'll have to keep ASEAN united. But let me also tell you very honestly that it will be difficult. So for instance, some members, I think it was Louis Ng and Christopher D'Souza, asked about the situation in Rakhine State. Now, members are familiar that one of the founding principles of ASEAN is non-interference in domestic affairs. So we can't directly intervene, but I would say this is a humanitarian disaster of the highest order. Secondly, if this problem is not resolved properly, you will end up creating yet another flashpoint, yet another sanctuary for extremists and terrorists, and it will become another trans-boundary threat. So in our own quiet, behind-the-scenes way, we have to try to make a positive difference. ASEAN agreed to mobilize the ASEAN Coordinating Center for Humanitarian Assistance to deliver assistance to the affected communities in Myanmar. And when we delivered it, we insisted without discrimination. All communities who need help should receive our help. To date, the center has delivered at least 2 loads of relief supplies worth US $500,000 to the Myanmar government. We've also deployed an ASEAN emergency response and assessment team to assist in the humanitarian relief efforts. We had an ASEAN foreign ministers retreat last month. Myanmar gave us a briefing, and we urged Myanmar to continue implementing the recommendations made by the Advisory Commission on Rakhine State, which was led by former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. We encouraged the expeditious commencement of the voluntary return of the refugees, but it has to be done in a safe, secure, and dignified way without undue delay. Frankly, these are easier said than done when you consider what has already transpired on the ground. We have also emphasized that the responsibility for resolving this complex problem ultimately rests with Myanmar and the stakeholders within Myanmar. Singapore and ASEAN will continue to do our part by encouraging all partners to work towards a long-term and comprehensive political solution and to create a conducive environment for the affected communities to rebuild their lives. So this is an example. There will always, from time to time, be an issue that tests our fundamental principles and our ability to make a positive contribution. Another area that we're focused on right now is the ASEAN-China relationship. We are reaching the end of our 3rd year of our coordinatorship of the ASEAN-China relationship. In these 3 years, we've been able to strengthen the relationship despite the challenges, and it will culminate with 2018 as designated as the ASEAN-China Year of Innovation. 2018 marks the 15th anniversary of the ASEAN-China Strategic Partnership, which we will commemorate with a statement on the ASEAN-China Strategic Partnership Vision 2030. This sets a roadmap for the future strategic partnership. ASEAN and China will also commence negotiations on the Code of Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea this year, soon. This is a significant milestone. It will serve, we hope, to reinforce the rules-based regional order. And as ASEAN-China coordinator, we will continue to be an honest broker. We will work closely with all sides, narrow the differences. I cannot promise it will be delivered soon because of the complexities involved. Ms. Sun Chueling asked about economic integration and free trade. Actually, free trade all over the world is unfairly blamed for the economic problems that, in fact, are the result of technological disruption. We believe, and we've been discussing it during the budget debate, the answer is not to build walls or to retreat from global competition. We believe we have to double down on restructuring our economies, upgrading the skills of our people, supporting innovation, and pursuing business opportunities globally. And this is why the ASEAN Economic Community is important, and this was launched in 2015. I've been told that so far, that plan had 609 measures, and 536 of them have been implemented. But without getting into the fine print, the point is the AEC is an attempt to enable our companies to better access ASEAN's dynamic market of more than 600 million people, where, as I said earlier, 60% are below the age of 35, and there's enormous investment opportunity. Fundamentally, I'm glad that we don't argue about this in Singapore, because in Singapore, trade is our lifeline. No other state has a trading volume that's 3.5 times our GDP. It is trade that allows our companies to expand beyond our small markets and to create jobs for Singaporeans. Now, although I've said the global consensus is eroding, the outlook is actually not so bleak. For instance, the 11 remaining parties of the Trans-Pacific Partnership have concluded talks, and on the 8th of March in Chile, Minister Lim Hng Kiang will have to make a long journey to sign the CPTPP, stands for Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Frankly, this exceeded my expectations. But even with just 11 members, 11 because the US has pulled out, it still represents about 500 million people, $10 trillion economy collectively. And we will continue to leave the door open for the US. We'll wait and see. In the meantime, we also hope to make substantive progress this year on the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. This RCEP is 10 ASEAN members and the 6 dialogue partners whom we have existing free trade agreements. That means India, China, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand. Now, some people have asked us, are these two rival blocs, rival agreements? And we say no. As far as Singapore is concerned, these are complementary building blocks, because what we envisage ultimately is a free trade area of the entire Asia Pacific. Members will also know that we just signed a free trade agreement with Sri Lanka last month. There are some complexities involved with the EU-Singapore Free Trade Agreement. We're sorting that out. Actually, it's been signed. It's a question of ratification. Singapore is an associate member of the Pacific Alliance, which is Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru. And Mercosur is also looking at exploring a free trade agreement with Singapore as a step, ultimately, perhaps, to a regional agreement between Mercosur and ASEAN. I've been in this business long enough to know that when I used to go to South America 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they were not interested in free trade agreements with us or with ASEAN. Yet, the mood has changed. The tide has changed. Dr. Muhammad Faisal Ibrahim asked about our immediate neighbors. So let me report first Malaysia and Indonesia. You know these are our closest, utmost importance. And with the right spirit of cooperation, we embark on win-win initiatives to strengthen bilateral ties and allow our companies to tap on the dynamic Malaysian and Indonesian economies. But you know as well as I do, our relations will always be complex, and issues will surface from time to time. But when they do, again, have a sense of perspective. Don't let a single issue derail the overall relationship. With Malaysia, we have continued to set new milestones recently. At the 8th Singapore-Malaysia Leaders Retreat in January, PM Lee and PM Najib officiated at the opening of the Marina 1 and Duo joint venture developments, which have a combined gross development value of Singapore $11 billion. Members will remember that these projects came about as sequelae to the settlement of the points of agreement on the KTM land. We also signed the Johor Bahru Singapore Rapid Transit System Link bilateral agreement. The RTS link, when completed in 2024, will dramatically change the way thousands, in fact it's hundreds of thousands of travelers who daily shuttle between Johor Bahru and Singapore each day. Then we also have the Kuala Lumpur-Singapore high-speed rail, which is also progressing well. The tender for the assets company was called last December. It will close in June. The results of the tender will be announced in about a year's time and will be conducted in a fair, open, and transparent manner. Such long-term strategic projects enhance our interdependence, gives us all a greater stake in each other's success, and demonstrates the tangible benefits of stable and positive ties. There have been questions even about Pedra Branca at the International Court of Justice. Let me just put it very simply. We will not let this issue define or derail our relationship. In fact, the most important point is this, that when we have a difference, we seek peaceful resolution according to international law. I should remind members that Malaysia will soon hold its general election. And again, we know from past history that every time election rhetoric heats up, sometimes Singapore becomes part of the political fodder. Now, on our part, we must ensure that we do not get drawn into their domestic politics, nor will we allow the import of foreign countries' politics into Singapore. With Indonesia, our bilateral cooperation remains deep, multifaceted. Last year, Singapore and Indonesia commemorated Rising 50, our 50th anniversary of our diplomatic relations, and we've been working to enhance economic linkages in digital economy, tourism, skills training. Singapore remained Indonesia's top foreign investor in 2017, with realized investments at US $8.4 billion. We are each other's second biggest source of tourists. The recently launched joint venture in Central Java, the Kendal Industrial Park, is doing well. 36 companies have committed as tenants, investments valued at over $600 million, and with the potential to create 5,000 jobs. We're also working with Indonesia on a digital industry cluster in Batam and to participate in the tech startup ecosystems in Jakarta, which, by the way, has quite a thriving digital scene. We also continue to work closely to strengthen counter-terrorism efforts. And since I used to be the Environment Minister, Hayes, I need to say that we appreciate the concerted efforts of President Joko Widodo and the provincial leaders to manage the Hayes situation. And this year it is better. And we are committed to working with Indonesia to tackle this transboundary issue. I just visited Jakarta last month, a good series of meetings with my counterpart, Ibu Retno Masudi, and other Indonesian leaders across the political spectrum. There is consensus across the board that Singapore-Indonesia partnership is valuable and brings mutual benefits, and so long as we can continue this positive tenor, we can manage the inevitable differences, which still remain. Overall, we believe in the prosper thy neighbor policy, and we want Malaysia and Indonesia especially to succeed. Good for us, good for the region. And then, of course, Brunei is a close and special friend. We celebrated the 50th anniversary of the currency interchangeability agreement in July 2017 during the fourth state visit of His Majesty the Sultan. And this interchangeability agreement is a unique, long-standing arrangement that has brought economic benefits for both Brunei and Singapore. Lowered business costs allowed us to interoperate. The Prime Minister Lee attended the Sultan's Golden Jubilee celebration last October, which is another occasion to reaffirm our close relationship. You may have heard that Brunei had a cabinet reshuffle recently, but we are familiar with many of the new ministers because we've had regular exchanges over the years. And we're looking forward to work with the new team to further take our special relationship to new heights. We continue to foster close ties among the younger generation of Bruneian and Singapore leaders through the annual Young Leaders Program, led by His Royal Highness Crown Prince Abdullah and DPM Teo Chee Hean. There were some questions on relationship with other key partners, Japan, Australia, India. With Japan, our relations are close, multifaceted. Last month, we hosted Foreign Minister Taro Kono, and in fact, I think DPM Tharman visited Japan in February, and PM will be there in June. We are elevating cooperation in traditional sectors like trade and connectivity, and also examining emerging areas like science and technology. They have a Japan Society 5.0 vision, which is very similar to our Smart Nation effort, and because of their lead with technology, we're looking at this as another platform for cooperation. And of course, both of us are aging societies, and that's another common challenge that we'll have to see how we can reorganize our societies and use technology to deal with this. Australia. Australian PM Malcolm Turnbull made an official visit in June 2017 for the second annual Leaders Summit, and in fact, PM Lee will be going to Australia this month. Yeah, today's the first, later this month. Our close friendship with Australia is underpinned by shared historical experience and shared strategic perspectives. We elevated our ties with Australia to a comprehensive strategic partnership in 2015. Implementation is well on track. One point I will just highlight is that no other country provides as much space for us to train in as Australia. When we go there, it's multiples the size of Singapore. With India, Mr. Low mentioned the emerging importance of India. India's population will exceed that of China, I think, by 2024. And unlike China, India remains young. India hosted a ASEAN-India commemorative summit in New Delhi in January, which PM attended. We have made good progress on the India-Singapore strategic partnership, particularly in smart cities and defense. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is scheduled to deliver the keynote address at the Shangri-La Dialogue in June this year. We look forward to discussing ways to further expand our bilateral ties, and SMS Maliki will give you more details. So let me conclude by saying that our diplomatic relations actually are in good order. And you would have noticed, actually, I've been more relaxed last year than in the previous year. But we need to stay alert to known unknowns and unknown unknowns, wildcards. What are these known unknowns? The tensions in the Korean Peninsula. Singapore has been implementing the UN Security Council resolutions fully and faithfully. We hope that the recent talks between the ROK and the DPRK will help arrive at a peaceful resolution. And ultimately, we hope that there will be a denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. How we in Singapore weather external shocks actually boils down to our domestic resilience and unity. I think it was Mr. Sito Yipin who asked about domestic support for foreign policy, and so have the members of parliament from the Workers' Party. Joan Pereira asked about our public diplomacy efforts. It's really, your questions are really centered on whether we can maintain domestic support and unity for our foreign policy. And that's why I said I'm grateful that there is bipartisan support in this chamber. International issues will increasingly be dragged into the domestic discourse. Our open, multiracial, multi-religious society gives many opportunities for foreign actors who are trying to test our resolve or even undermine our unity. Singaporeans must be well informed, not only about the multitude and diversity of views, but must also appreciate the corresponding trade-offs that we have to weigh up. Singaporeans have to be discerning towards fake news, not allow ourselves to be distracted and divided. I wanted to quote our former president, Dr. Tony Tan, at the S. Rajaratnam lecture last year. And he said, when someone sends you a message, take some time, reflect on the message, ask yourself what it really means. Think carefully about who stands to benefit from the proposed message and whether it is in Singapore's own national interests. On this front, MFA has been stepping up its outreach to Singaporeans at various levels, and we do need strong and informed support from the public because foreign policy begins at home. I also want to thank Mr. Desmond Chu and Cedric Fu for your questions on MFA offices and resources. I think you all have noticed that I think MFA is the ministry with the smallest budget. It's okay, I'm not asking for more. I'm actually very proud to have some of the most talented and dedicated officers. And over the years, MFA has worked on a rigorous selection system, an equally rigorous nurturing system. And this includes even bringing in mid-career entrants with the relevant skill sets and experience. It's up to us to optimize our limited resources to provide our officers with continuous training. But I think most of all, what really motivates our officers is that sense of meaning and significance, that they are advancing Singapore's interests, protecting sovereignty, expanding opportunities for business, looking after Singaporeans who get into trouble. And that's especially for our consular services, which for most Singaporeans is the public human face of MFA. I would want to add that the MFA families pay a very heavy price. The trailing spouse who has to compromise his or her career, the children of MFA diplomats who are deprived of a Singaporean childhood. We should bear in mind that this is a family enterprise. And what I've tried to do in my time there is to give credit and to emphasize family and to tell my officers that they never need to be embarrassed about saying that they need to do something or need to take some time out because they need to address family needs. I'm sure you all agree. So let me conclude by saying we must maintain a realistic view of the world as it is, not as we hope it to be. We have to seek the right balance. We have to promote regional unity. We need to pursue global opportunities wherever these arise. And in terms of style, we will continue to adopt a quiet, friendly, but firm style of diplomacy. And we will be honest, competent, reliable, constructive partners. Most of all, diplomacy begins at home, and our foreign policy rests on a domestic consensus. And I will continue to work with all members in this House to reach out to Singaporeans, to build a deeper appreciation of the fundamental truths, the hard truths that underpin our foreign policy, and to develop a shared national instinct against external attempts to pressure, influence, or divide us. Thank you.